Here is something that will change how you think about modern warfare. On the battlefields of eastern Ukraine right now, in the mud and the artillery fire and the drone swarms, Ukrainian crews are climbing into an armored vehicle that was first built in 1966, a vehicle older than most of their grandfathers' cars, a vehicle that was decommissioned by the country that made it over a decade ago and put into storage, a vehicle that, on paper, has no business being on a 21st century battlefield. And those crews, the men who drive it, maintain it, and sometimes live and die in it, are saying something that nobody expected. They prefer it to the Soviet armor they grew up with. They say it is easier to drive, easier to fix, more comfortable for the troops inside, better at keeping its crew alive, and uniquely suited to one of the most critical and overlooked missions in this entire war, getting wounded soldiers out of kill zones before they bleed to death. The vehicle is the Swedish PBV-302 and is over 60 years old. Sweden sent Ukraine its entire stock of them. And what is happening with those vehicles on the Ukrainian front lines right now is one of the most unexpected stories in this war. I'm Flash America. Stay with me. Because what this story actually reveals about how wars are really fought, about what matters on a modern battlefield, and about what Sweden has done for Ukraine is more interesting than any single vehicle's specification sheet. Let's start with the scale of what Sweden has actually contributed to Ukraine, because the PBV-302 story only makes sense in that context. As of now, at least 32 nations have provided military aid to Ukraine, with a total value approaching $150 billion. Of those 32 nations, few can match the contributions made by Sweden, NATO's newest member. Sweden has provided 21 separate packages of military aid worth approximately $11.24 billion, with military equipment accounting for around 80% of that total. The packages include cutting-edge modern systems, the Tridon Mark II air defense system, the Archer 155mm self-propelled howitzer, alongside older equipment designed to fill gaps in Ukraine's arsenal. And sitting in that second category, filling a gap that nobody fully anticipated, are 239 armored vehicles that first rolled off a Swedish production line in 1966. The delivery of PBV-302s to Ukraine was first announced in May 2024 as part of Sweden's 16th tranche of aid, a massive package worth around $1.3 billion. The announcement specified that Sweden would be sending the entire Swedish stock of its locally produced PBV-302s. At the time, the expected number was around 300 vehicles. Ukraine, notably, had not been expecting this. The country only officially approved the PBV-302 for use in its armed forces 3 months after the announcement in August 2024. By November of that same year, the first units had been delivered and formally welcomed into the Ukrainian armed forces. Sweden confirmed completion of the delivery in August 2024. The final count was 239 vehicles, lower than the initial estimate of 300 for reasons we will get to in a moment. Along with the vehicles, Sweden committed to providing spare parts, maintenance equipment, and ammunition to support the new brigades Ukraine was forming around them. That commitment to ongoing support is actually the key to understanding both why Sweden was able to part with its entire PBV-302 fleet and why the final number came in below the original projection. The PBV-302 has been out of active Swedish service for a long time. By 2014, the entire fleet had been decommissioned and moved into storage. Sweden had replaced it with more modern vehicles, which we will discuss, and the PBV-302s had been sitting in warehouses ever since. So when Sweden announced it was sending Ukraine its entire stock, the cynical reading was obvious. Sweden is clearing its warehouses, dumping old junk on an ally to look generous while getting rid of vehicles it no longer needs. That reading is wrong, and it's wrong for two distinct reasons. The first reason is what Sweden sent alongside the PBV-302s. Sweden did not send Ukraine only its decommissioned Cold War armor. It has also delivered at least 50 CV-9040C infantry fighting vehicles, the modern vehicle with which it replaced the PBV-302. The CV-90 family, Combat Vehicle 90, is designed for high mobility and strong protection, with multi-role functionality covering reconnaissance, infantry fighting, and fire support. The CV-9040C is an upgraded variant featuring improved armor, a more powerful engine, and the Barracuda thermal camouflage system. This is current generation military technology, Sweden is clearly providing whatever cutting-edge vehicles it can spare alongside the older equipment. This is not a warehouse clearance, it is a comprehensive aid package. The second reason is simpler. The final number of PBV 302s delivered, 239 instead of the projected 300, reflects honest quality control. The vehicles that were not transferred are the ones that were too worn or too degraded for combat use. Those are now the source of spare parts that Sweden committed to providing. So the 239 vehicles that reach Ukraine are the ones in working condition, supported by a parts pipeline drawn from the ones that did not make the cut. That is not dumping junk, that is a thoughtful, sustainable support structure for an older vehicle fleet. And Ukraine's perspective on the age of those vehicles? Entirely pragmatic. If it works, send it, and the more, the better. To understand why Ukraine feels that way, you need to understand the armored vehicle situation that Ukraine walked into in February 2022. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion, Ukraine was already outnumbered in nearly every category of military equipment. But the gap in armored fighting vehicles, or AFVs, was particularly stark. Russia was estimated to have between 15,800 and 27,000 AFVs. Ukraine had anywhere from 3,300 to 8,500. The estimates vary widely because numbers in wartime always do. But regardless of which figures are closest to accurate, the gap is significant, and the majority of Ukraine's fleet was old to begin with. Its infantry fighting vehicle fleet was dominated by Soviet-era tracked BMP-1 and BMP-2 models. The BMP-1 entered service in 1966, the BMP-2 followed in 1980. Ukraine's most numerous APCs at the start of the war were BTR-80s, an 8-wheeled Soviet design that entered service in 1985, alongside earlier BTR-60 and BTR-70 variants from the 1960s and 1970s. Ukraine also had its domestically produced BTR-3 and BTR-4 Butsefal designs and the newer Novator, unveiled in 2017. But the point is that Ukraine was already very accustomed to operating a mixture of old and new equipment. That situation evolved dramatically during the war. By the end of the first quarter of 2026, roughly 9,500 Russian AFVs had been damaged or destroyed on Ukrainian soil. But Ukraine has taken serious losses too. The proliferation of FPV drones, first-person view attack drones that can be guided precisely into the weak spots of any armored vehicle, has fundamentally changed what armor can survive on a modern battlefield. Skilled FPV operators, Ukrainian crews will tell you, eventually find the weak spot on any vehicle. It does not matter how modern or how expensive the armor is, the drone finds the gap. As a result, Ukraine has been accepting AFVs from every available source, at least 2,000 Rochelle Senators from Canada, 300 M2A2 ODS-SA Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, and 30 M1 Abrams from the United States, 280 VABs from France, 110 Marder 1A3s from Germany, 36 Patria AMV XPs from Finland and Latvia, hundreds of M113s. The ages range from modern, the Canadian Senator entered service in 2018, to the M113, which entered service in 1961. Against that backdrop, the PBV 302's age does not stand out. Ukraine already fields multiple vehicles from the same era. The question is not how old the PBV 302 is. The question is how it actually performs. Before getting into what Ukrainian crews are saying about it, let me describe what the PBV 302 actually is, because you are building a picture in your head without any footage to look at, and the details matter. Serial production of the PBV 302 began in 1966 in the Swedish city of Örnsköldsvik and continued until December 1971. A total of 644 were produced at a cost of approximately 233,000 Swedish kroner each, under $50,000 at the time, or roughly $430,000 adjusted for inflation today. That low cost was achieved by using commercially developed Volvo engines, the Penta THD 100B producing 280 horsepower, and Volvo gearboxes combined with undercarriage components already being produced at scale for other light combat vehicles. The pragmatic part sourcing did not compromise quality. The PBV 302's armor is 23 millimeters of fully welded steel with dual-layer side armor plates. This protects occupants from small arms fire and rounds up to 20 millimeter caliber. When it was designed, this was superior protection to both the American M113 and the British FV-432, its main rivals at the time. That comparison still holds today. It also beats the protection level of the BMP-1 and BMP-2, which is one of the first things Ukrainian crews bring up when asked why they prefer it. The PBV-302 was originally classified as an infantry fighting vehicle, designed so that its crew could engage enemy infantry, armored vehicles, and even slow-moving aircraft from within the vehicle. Its main armament is a 20mm Hispano-Suiza automatic cannon mounted in a one-person turret, capable of firing at 500 rounds per minute, traversing a full 360 degrees, and engaging targets from -10 to +50 degrees of elevation, giving it some anti-aircraft capability. The vehicle carries 3 belts of 135 high-explosive rounds each, plus 30-round box magazines. But here is where the picture gets complicated, because in Ukraine, the PBV-302 is not primarily being used as an IFV. It is being used as an armored personnel carrier, a battle taxi, and for medical evacuation. And the reason for that tells you everything about both the vehicle's real strengths and its real limitations. Let's start with what Ukrainian crews love about it, because the praise is specific, detailed, and comes from people whose lives depend on getting this right. The first thing every Ukrainian driver mentions is how easy it is to operate. A crew member identified by his call sign, Vasil, described it this way: "Operating it is pretty easy. It's not much harder than driving a car, just with levers instead of a steering wheel." Another crew member was even more direct. "Any puddle, any muddy slope we've got, she pulls through beautifully." Ukrainian crews report that the PBV-302 can smoothly overcome obstacles in third or fourth gear without slowing down. Compare that to the BMPs, where crew members say that when a gear jams, a common occurrence, you have to wrestle with it to knock it loose. In an environment where drones, RPGs, and artillery are hunting you at every moment, a vehicle that handles reliably is not a luxury. It is a survival requirement. The second major advantage Ukrainian crews identify is maintenance. And in a war where vehicles break down constantly under demanding conditions, this matters enormously. A driver, identified as Kuba, described the contrast with the BMP directly. Compared to a BMP, you had to take half the engine apart just to take off the starter. Here, everything is easier to access. It runs smoother. Another crew member elaborated on why. The engine access is really well thought out. It sits under the cover you're actually sitting on. The cover comes off with 3 bolts. If we've got a hose, a sensor, a filter change, or we need to bleed the system, we do all of that without leaving the vehicle, right from the commander's seat. The ability to perform maintenance without exposing yourself to enemy fire is not a small thing on a modern battlefield. Ukrainian drivers also report that the PBV-302 is far harder to detrack than the BMPs. Track throwing, where the drive sprockets lose alignment with the caterpillar track, is a common malfunction in tracked vehicles. On the PBV-302, track tension can be adjusted directly from the driver's cabin. As one driver explains, "We can tighten or loosen them based on the situation we're in. This ability to adapt track tension to different road surfaces contributes to consistent performance across long distances." One crew member noted, "At the training base, we put a pretty serious number of kilometers on it. Not once did the tracks throw a shoe. Compared to our BMPs, it's very hard to detrack." The third area where Ukrainian crews give the PBV-302 high marks is interior design. The vehicle carries a crew of 3, driver, gunner, and commander, with the driver positioned centrally at the front, flanked by the commander and gunner. The engine and transmission are under the floor, which allows the interior to be optimized for troop transport. The PBV-302 can carry 8 passengers, the same as the BMP-1 and 1 more than the BMP-2. But according to the Ukrainians, the Swedish vehicle offers considerably more room. One soldier noted that in the BMP, at his height, he has to fold himself in. The PBV-302 offers meaningfully more legroom and headroom, even for troops in body armor. There are 8 seats for dismounts, plus storage space for weapons, extra ammunition, and rations. The exit design also deserves specific mention, because fast dismounting under fire is a life-or-death function. The PBV-302 has 2 large rear doors. Above the troop compartment, hydraulically operated hatches allow soldiers to engage from within the vehicle. A pressure-sensitive strip under the hatches prevents accidental closure when hands or weapons are near. As one crew member describes it, these doors have two closing positions. To close them in the normal, unhurried way, we just close them. If we need a quick close, we flip out a special leg and shut the door. No handle needed. They don't seal tightly, but it's very fast when you need it. But perhaps the most important role the PBV-302 is playing in Ukraine, and one that deserves far more attention than it gets, is medical evacuation. On a modern battlefield saturated with FPV drones and artillery, getting wounded soldiers out of contact zones quickly is one of the most difficult and dangerous missions in the entire war. Every minute a wounded soldier cannot be evacuated is a minute that determines whether he lives or dies. And most armored vehicles require significant modification before they can effectively carry stretchers. The PBV-302 does not. The standard production variant was designed from the beginning to handle medical evacuations without special modifications. The interior can be reconfigured to carry up to 4 stretchers at once. As one Ukrainian crew member describes the process, if we need to evacuate 4 wounded guys on stretchers, we break all of this down. It all comes off. The mounted equipment gets removed, hung on the seats, and we can lay 2 casualties up top and 2 down below. You cannot do that in a BMP, not without serious modification. The PBV-302 does it out of the box. Sweden also delivered specialized variants as part of the package, including the SJUK TPBV 3026, which is a dedicated medical evacuation variant. Since Ukraine received Sweden's entire stock, it almost certainly received at least some of these dedicated medevac vehicles. But even the standard variants are performing this role effectively. Now let's talk about the one area where the PBV-302 genuinely falls short. Because this is not a story about a perfect vehicle. It is a story about a vehicle being used with honesty about what it can and cannot do. The 20mm Hispano-Suiza cannon is the PBV-302's main armament. On paper, it sounds capable. 500 rounds per minute, full 360-degree traverse, limited anti-aircraft capability against targets like helicopters up to 1.2 miles away. More firepower than the M113's 50-caliber machine gun, but significantly less firepower than the BMP-1's 73mm cannon or the BMP-2's 30mm cannon. That firepower gap is the smaller problem. The bigger problem is ammunition management. The vehicle carries its ammunition in 3 belts of 135 rounds each, plus 30-round box magazines. That cannon can fire at up to 8 rounds per second. In an intense firefight, a crew can burn through a 30-round magazine in less than 4 seconds. Every magazine change is a pause in fire, and every pause in fire is an opening for the enemy. As one Ukrainian gunner describes it, if we run out of rounds in the cannon, we can't fire. Can't fire, we're as good as dead. The Bradleys and BMP-2s feed ammunition in belts of several hundred rounds, allowing sustained fire for far longer without that vulnerability. The second major issue with the cannon is stabilization. The Hispano-Suiza on the PBV-302 does not have a stabilizer. It cannot fire effectively on the move. In one gunner's description, "On the move, it's chaotic. Rounds are going nowhere. We need to work on a tree line. We stop, the gunner acquires the target. We fire, and then we move." On a battlefield where FPV drones can acquire a stationary vehicle in seconds, having to stop in order to engage a target is a serious tactical liability. There is also a crew comfort problem, ironically, in the crew stations rather than the passenger compartment. All that space, optimized for troops and stretchers in the back, came at the cost of crew space at the front. According to Ukrainian crews, larger soldiers struggle to get into position comfortably. The gunner needs to stand up in the turret to use the anti-aircraft targeting sight, exposing themselves in the process. Add it all up and the conclusion is clear. The PBV-302 is not a fighting vehicle for the modern Ukrainian battlefield. It lacks the sustained firepower, the fire-on-the-move capability, the advanced optics, and the situational awareness that modern Western IFVs like the CV-90 provide. As an infantry fighting vehicle in the traditional sense, it is undergunned and constrained. But as a battle taxi, a vehicle that moves troops safely to and from the front, handles medical evacuations, operates reliably in difficult terrain, and keeps its crew alive when things go wrong, It is exactly what Ukraine needs more of. And that is where the real lesson of the PBV 302 story sits. Ukraine has been forced to think about armored vehicles differently than most armies do in peacetime. In peacetime, you optimize for the ideal vehicle for each mission: the best IFV for frontline fighting, the best APC for troop transport, the best medevac vehicle for casualty evacuation. In a war that has consumed armored vehicles at a rate nobody predicted, you optimize for what is available, what is reliable, what your crews can actually operate and maintain under fire, and what keeps soldiers alive long enough to fight tomorrow. By those measures, the PBV 302 is not a curiosity or a stopgap. It is a serious contribution to Ukraine's war effort. 239 vehicles that move reliably, maintain easily, protect their crews better than the Soviet alternatives, and carry wounded soldiers out of kill zones in a configuration that the BMPs simply cannot replicate. Ukrainian crews know this. One crew member summed up the PBV 302 this way: "Good vehicle, nothing bad to say about it. Sure, it has its quirks, but a machine of that age, and it still works, still gets the job done." That is the real story of the PBV 302. Not that it is old, not that Sweden cleared a warehouse, but that Sweden provided a complete, honest, sustainable package of military support: modern CV-90s for frontline fighting, old PBV 302s for the missions they are actually suited for, spare parts to keep them running, and ammunition to keep them fighting. And Ukraine took what it was given, figured out where each piece fits, and made it work. In a war where every functioning vehicle is a life and every reliable vehicle is a force multiplier, a 60-year-old Swedish armored carrier pulling wounded soldiers through the mud is not an anachronism. It is exactly what victory is made of. I'm Flash America. If this gave you a different perspective on how modern wars are actually fought and what military aid really looks like on the ground, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. I cover the real story behind the headlines every week. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What other older military equipment do you think is outperforming expectations in Ukraine? I'll see you in the next one.